Friends, how are you? Welcome to this new episode. Today, we are going to have the experiences of a doctor who shares with us some of the many things that happened to him in an important sanatorium in Argentina. And I would like to know, as always, what you think about this case that we are going to hear today, and specifically about hospitals, where often the paranormal activity is greater than other places, and also if something similar has ever happened to you. Remember that if you want to send me your own experience, you have to do it to the WhatsApp that appears on the screen at this moment. Welcome!
My name is Lucas. I am currently 36 years old. I am a doctor in the province of Formosa, but this experience that I am going to tell you to perhaps add to the many hospital experiences that you usually upload in your videos occurred back in the year 2014 to 2015. I had finished a year before receiving my medical degree. So I was doing the medical clinic residency in a private sanatorium, one of the most important perhaps, in the province of Corrientes.
This sanatorium is very large, and I remember that just on the first floor where the medical clinic was, there were more than 40 beds just for hospitalization. And one detail that I would also like to mention is that this sanatorium had a Programa de Atención Médica Integral quota. So many people who were hospitalized were of an advanced age and with many social deficiencies. And I'm not referring exactly to money. There were many elderly patients who had no contact with their family, unfortunately. Either they didn't visit them, basically they abandoned them in the sanatorium, but in following the treatment that was being done to them. I know in following the treatment that was being done to them. I know many are unaware of this, but it's a harsh reality that is lived in hospitals every day. It's very hard for us in these cases, but I assure you it's much worse for the patients, who by themselves it's not pleasant to be hospitalized, going through very ugly moments. To own family is a combo that does not help recovery at all. At that time I was working on this first floor in medical clinic, which was basically a very long hallway where these 40 rooms were distributed on both sides, and in the middle of this sector was the nursing office. Surely many know what it's about, but others maybe not. I'll tell you that it's basically a place where everything necessary for nurses to organize their tasks and plan the controls for each of the patients is located. And right in front of this nursing office there was a device where you could enable the television for each of the rooms. This information is important and you'll soon find out why. To clarify, each television worked independently, and in order to enable them, the relatives of each patient had to go to this device, insert a 1 peso coin, and then you could watch for an hour. That was the value in those years. Nowadays it must be much more, surely. What I want to make clear with this is that there was no way for a TV to turn on without someone paying for the service.
Why am I telling you this? Because it's important. We had a patient who was admitted in a room that was right in front of the nursing office. He was an elderly patient, must have been over 70, 80 years old, who, due to his chronic condition, was bedridden. In fact, he was a patient who practically had no contact with. From a neurological perspective, the patient was unresponsive to stimuli and couldn't communicate, but was admitted, likely for pneumonia. He was under the care of his son at that time, and it was approximately 2 or 3 in the morning perhaps, where I was awake because I had just had an admission in another room and I was there in the nursing office writing a medical order.
At that moment, this man's son comes out of the room, tells the nurses that he was going down for a few minutes to have a coffee and would be back with his dad. He mentioned it because he planned to have coffee and then return to his father. He specifically mentioned it because he is allowed to wander around the sanatorium, and in case of anything, he gave the relevant notice, so we were alert. Let's remember that this or something. At one point, and while we were in the a moment, and while we were in the office doing the indications of this new income, we had 2 of the nurses next to me controlling everything. And in the middle of this silence of dawn, we heard a tremendous noise. At first we didn't understand what it was, but then we realized it was the television where this man I mentioned before was, the room we had right in front of us. His son, remember, had left about half an hour ago, and there was no one else in the room but this patient. The issue was not only hearing the television on, we began to realize that someone was changing the channels and the volume was as high as it could go. One of the nurses ran in and couldn't believe it. The remote control was on one of the side tables alone. The remote control was on one of the side tables. The volume was very high, and only this bedridden old man was there to check the device And indeed, no one had enabled it. No one had placed that 1 peso coin. What had happened was literally impossible. Let's see, it could have been a malfunction of the device that controls them, and add to this also the coincidence that the remote control also works badly, activating itself. Of course it could be, but the curious thing was that it only happened that morning. It never happened again, neither with that TV nor with any other. And maybe it was just a coincidence, but the next day had no relation to that event. And now also that it has no relation to that event.
And also what the nurses themselves have told me, in that same nursing office at the back is the kitchen, and they often say that at night they heard as if several dishes were falling and breaking everything. And in fact, several patients also came out to see what had happened, or relatives rather, and when they go into the kitchen to see, absolutely nothing had really happened. Also in this sanatorium, it had happened that in the lowest hospitalization room, where the very important person patients were usually admitted, the highly recommended patients, as we called them, near this hospitalization sector, which was quite eerie, just that area, because it was like an open field, and there was a kiosk, a kind of little bar that was inside the clinic, the sanatorium, where obviously it worked normally during the day, but always during business hours. At 8 o'clock, the kiosk would close and everything would go dark, but it wouldn't close with those transparent plastic sheets where one could actually see everything. Well, the point is that at that moment, my boss comes down because they call her to see a patient who was in pain. It was in the middle of the night. I really don't know what time it was. And when she comes out from seeing the patient, she's making some indications in the nursing area of that sector, and she looks towards the kiosk area and gets very scared because she sees clearly a very well-dressed lady, apparently very coquettish, having a tea when at that moment there should be no one there. Because first, it is possible that they serve her the tea because it was all dark, everything was closed, and secondly, it was all dark, but you could clearly see a lady having a tea that she later tells that also. Notice that she couldn't see the feet of that lady, very scared. She turns her head and tells the nurse. She looks at the nurse, rather, who was in that sector, and says, Maria. Then the nurse, without realizing, without her explaining more things, she says, yes, doctor, I have also seen her, or I have also seen her.
And I have another experience that I would like to tell you. It's really tremendous, and it also happened to me while working here in Formosa.
It started to become quite common for different patients to complain or just tell about something that had caught their attention. Before telling you all these details, it should be clarified that these were patients who were going through difficult health moments for different reasons, and in many cases in the so-called death improvement, and they told us about this strange issue. For those who don't know, the death improvement is called when a patient is going through a very critical moment and inexplicably improves for a few hours before dying. And it is perfectly well known that the brain of a person who is about to avoid often produces certain hallucinations, or at least it is believed to be so. It would be perfectly possible, but in this case it is extremely strange, and now you are going to understand why. The comments of patients in different rooms began to repeat themselves, who did not communicate with each other and who were completely unaware of what one or the other was saying. And they were talking about something chilling. They told about a little girl who played in the rooms, hid behind the curtains, simply sat in a corner, crawled under the bed, and if not, she would stand staring at them or also bother them all night long. The strange thing, as I tell you, is that these comments were from patients who had no contact with each other, and what's more, it happened for many years. Surely it continues the same today. Do you know what was the most traumatic for us? We knew perfectly well that, regardless of the health of the patient who saw this little girl, at least within a span of 24 hours, they would die. As I told you before, there were patients who were in the last stretch of their life fighting against a terminal illness. But in other cases, they saw this girl and died without us ever finding out why. What was the real cause of such a sudden death?
Many times, this little girl that the patients see, one attributes it to the patient being very disoriented, especially in harmful patients. He is disoriented or starts to hallucinate seeing things, but when one does not know about this topic, he really attributes it to this issue. But when he realizes that many patients really see the same little girl, he realizes that many patients really see the same little girl, which is impossible if we are talking about a hallucination, only that everyone sees the same figure and all with the same characteristics. We realize, not because the patient told us the other day, but because many times the nurses or relatives call us, or because the patient in some cases starts to complain or worry about what to do with a little girl without her parents, or worry about what to do with a little girl without her parents. At night in a hospital, I know there are even descriptions of men dressed in black. Sometimes animals are described, but I don't know what it really is. One doesn't know how to interpret it, if they are someone, some being, a superior entity that comes to look for these patients, or what it really is. But it is really something that escapes a lot of logic. It has no explanation, and yet many refer to seeing or having this same experience.